Welcome to the inaugural episode of Booth Life for Geezers. I'm Pat, one of the geezers. My husband Mark and I have been married for 51 years, and we've been addicted to transformations our whole professional careers. Mark was a bankruptcy attorney. His big job was to help people get their financial life turned around. I was a psychologist and a psychology professor my whole career, and my big job was to make people more knowledgeable, but also have a better life, be more mature, make better choices, fix problems, and all that. But it was all a world of ideas and people. Meanwhile, both of us are also very interested in hands-on kind of things. We are living on the family farm, and Mark is no longer a dairy farm, but Mark grew up with the operating machinery and hanging on to things because you might need them, and fixing old machinery because new machinery was expensive and all of that. And he's very handy with his hands. He does stained glass and woodworking and different kinds of things. Has a big workshop in an outbuilding here. And I also have been a sewer, a crafter, a flipper my whole life. I did my first flip when I was 17 and continued through our early married life with furniture and all sorts of different things. When I retired, what I did was I cleaned the house from top to bottom, including meeting a goal of getting rid of 20% of the stuff in our basement. And then thought, now what? Mark, on the other hand, when he retired, he rehabbed a trailer, a Shasta that was just a piece of junk, and got it into good working condition. It's beautiful now. And went to EMT school. So he's been an EMT for several years now. And then when I was ready, he was kind of ready to try something new. And so we rented a small space, actually two small spaces, at a small vintage mall in a nearby town. And it was a good place to get started because our booths were like 4x6 and 4x7. And we were successful there with those two booths. When we added a third booth, then we started to not make rent. And so growing pains, trying to figure it out. One booth was more girly. The other booth was more gentlemanly. The third booth was more rustic, trying to find our vibe. We decided to try a different store, one that was open 7 days a week instead of 5. And the store is Best of Janesville Vintage Mall. It's a great place. We really like it there, and we feel we've been relatively successful there, although we're still trying to figure it out. Some months we don't make rent. Even just months when you do make rent, it doesn't cover all your expenses. So thus far, it's been a hobby kind of like skiing, where you are paying money or golf or something. But it's the kind of thing we both really, really enjoy. So we would much rather be fumbling around trying to figure out vintage booth life than going on golf outings or traveling to ski. So if you're up for bumbling along with us as we try various things, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and come along for the ride. We hope you will. We hope you'll enjoy us. And we're going to move on to some getting started kind of questions to ask yourself if you're contemplating becoming a geezer booth operator. I told you I'm a retired professor. I've got 3 pages of notes. In fact, you might want a pen and paper now that I think about it. Although you could watch and rewatch, comment each time you rewatch. That could help my channel. Anyway, first thing to think about is, what do you want to sell? Is it going to be large furniture pieces, a whole lot of little small things, fine antiques, home decor, items you make. Get that a little bit figured out. If you are looking into selling fine antiques, then don't even think about a vintage mall. The definition of antiques would be over 100 years old. And vintage is, I think, more toward the 50 years old, but it can be newer than that. And if your items are more recent than 100 years old, you might want to go with a vintage mall as opposed to as an antique store, antique mall. If you want to make things and sell them, you're going to want to look for a mall that will allow that. Some malls, vintage or antique, won't allow homemade items in there. And in my personal opinion, it's nice to have kind of a mix of vintage, maybe even some wholesale items, and items that people are making or flipping. That's just my personal thought. With respect to your intended inventory, also think about, would it sell better on eBay or Etsy? For instance, if you recently inherited a collection of crystal, that's probably too new to be in an antique mall, but won't sell in a vintage mall. However, you might be able to sell it online. Second question, now that you've narrowed down what you want to sell, do you have the wherewithal to sell that? I'm speaking more about the large furniture end of things. Do you have a van, a truck, a trailer that you can haul things away from an estate sale and to the mall? Do you have someone to help you load and unload? And then do you have storage space? Because if you have large furniture and your large furniture piece sells, you're going to have to get right back in the store with the next large piece of furniture, which probably means you're going to have several large pieces in stock and ready to go so that you can be able to do that. So it requires some storage space if you're doing furniture. And then also consider if you're willing to mix it up. Let's say you really like little bitty things, like little pitchers and little glasses and things like that. Usually booths look better if it's kind of a mix of things, different sizes, different textures, maybe a shelf of all blue and white, a shelf of something else, a shelf of something else, but to mix up what you're doing. Not a hard and fast rule, but it's worth considering at this stage of the game. Might you be willing to put in a small sewing box along with your other things? Third thing, are the items that you want to sell currently selling well in your area? An example would be clear glass. A lot of people have clear glass, want to sell the clear glass, but if you go and ask, is clear glass selling? Probably nationwide, it really isn't. And there might be certain items that are maybe the more collectible kind of clear glass might be, but in general, clear glass isn't. How you find this out is talk to other vendors or go on a Facebook group that probably ideally would be in your area, but Vintage Booth Pro is not restricted to an area, and there's a lot of good information about what is selling, and there will be people who are in your area, and you can ask on there once you become a member, is Pyrex selling in our area, for instance, if you want to sell Pyrex. They will tell you. Fourth thing to think about is fit. Are you a good fit for the store, and is the store a good fit for you? To figure this out, you have to become a secret shopper. You have to be making some trips to different vintage malls and evaluating the stores, the shopping experience at the stores, the items in the stores. what the booths are like in the stores. My advice is to go at different times of day and different days of the week, especially if you've got it narrowed down to a couple of different stores, just to evaluate how busy the store is and whether there's enough traffic in there to make it likely that you'll be successful. So you can also maybe make a purchase and ask the clerk, do you know if there's any space available here? And just kind of feel the clerk out. You can also feel the clerk out about whether the items you want to sell, vintage clothing, let's say, are selling in the store. And, as opposed to being just displayed in the store like it's a museum, are people actually buying that stuff? You would visit several stores, assessing the vibe, and kind of like when you put on a new shirt and it either feels like, I love this shirt, or this is going to be scratchy all day long. You get that feeling when you go in the store and start talking to people and kind of getting the sense of what the store is like. Look at the booths. Are most of them appealing? Do you walk around and you think, now that's a nice booth, and that's a nice booth. That one's pretty good. Oh, but that one's really good. On the one hand, you want the store to be a very good store because more people go to a very good store. On the other hand, a variety is nice. So don't be turned off if there are a few booths that aren't exactly consistent with the theme. Empty booths are bad. And so sometimes the store will fill an empty booth with their stuff for a while and it'll look a little less than good. But they'll also accept vendors that sell things that are maybe if they had a choice, they wouldn't necessarily say yes to that vendor, but they have to keep their booths filled in order to not look like they're empty. So evaluate whether most of the booths are appealing. Do you look around you and booth after booth is really pretty good or excellent and you want to go into it? They're walkable, the merchandise is displayed well, they understand about staging and that kind of thing. That's what you want. Don't consider that competition. Consider that something that will help your booth grow, because that type of store attracts more buyers into the store. While you're in there, see if you can spot some vendors. You might be more likely to spot a vendor on a weekday, especially maybe in the morning. Look for somebody with a bin. Likely it'll be another geezer. Not always, but a fair number of the vendors are going to be geezers. Then they will talk to you. Just ask. This happens all the time. Is this your booth? Yes, it is. How do you like the store? Well, it's a great store, et cetera, et cetera. Do you make rent? We did this when we were looking at this particular store we're in now, and people were very glad to talk to us about the store, and they were highly positive about the store, which is good. Good signs to notice during your recon mission. Is the store clean? Vacuumed, swept, bathrooms clean? Are the booths orderly, clean, and appealing? Is there somebody that greets you, says hello, seems happy that you're there, offers to help you perhaps? And look also to see the overall inventory of the store and whether the inventory that you intend to sell is going to either be consistent or fill a gap. Let's say you're thinking you want to sell fusion paint or something, and there isn't a paint dealer in the store. That would be an example of filling a gap. Red flags on your visits. Are there multiple floors? Now, this is mainly an issue for us geezers. One mall that I went into was nice, actually a couple of malls. They had space available, but the space was available either in the basement, which didn't smell good in either place, or the attic. It would have involved stairs. I have knee issues. My husband has some back issues. We were going to be doing furniture. So that excluded those places for us. If there had been available space on the ground level, then I would have considered those stores. Another red flag is many dusty or several dusty, poorly maintained booths. You can look at them and think that stuff has been sitting there for a long time. Personally, I think that's a bad sign, and I would not want to be next to one of those vendors. And it makes me less inclined to go back to that store. So, but that might be just my personal idiosyncrasy. Another example, when I was looking, I was in a store. It was too dusty and it was more antique-y, but also the ceiling was falling down. It's a big store, multiple levels, but on the main level where I wanted to be, the ceiling was falling down. So, X them off the list. Bad smell. Don't want that. Does it smell like Goodwill in there or moldy or something? Mm-mm. If the staff there or even the other vendors are audibly speaking negatively about either the store or the other vendors, that's a red flag. In the store we're currently in, and actually the store we were in before, the tone was deliberately very positive, and the subject changed if anything started to get negative. And it's important to maintain that, and a good store manager will maintain a professional level of communication. Okay, moving on to step 5. And you might want to have some business cards made up before you do step 5. And I'll tell you why. I had made some before doing it, and it helped me secure booth space in kind of an unexpected way. So I guess I'll tell you the story now. I was curious about one particular vendor mall in another town. I went to like 6 different towns around us that have vendor malls. And I thought they didn't have space because I didn't see any available. It was another one of those, it's on 3 levels and the basement was smelly kind of thing. But attached to that was a store that sells IOD products, which I use. And I also wanted to buy some of the new release of stamps. This was a year ago, spring. So I went in there, I picked out my stamps, I got some paint, I went up to the counter, and I was the only one in there, so it wasn't a problem to ask. And I said, do you happen to know if the store is likely to have an opening? And she said, well, probably not on the main level. That's all the owner fills that space, but maybe on the 3rd level or the basement. And we kept talking. We talked about the IOD release, and I gave her one of my business cards, and I said, if you happen to hear of any spaces that might be available, would you mind giving me a call? And she said, sure, I'd be glad to do that. And now that I think about it, there is a place that I think has space available. Let me just call and see. Now, this woman didn't know me. She didn't know if I could do it. She was just being helpful. She liked my business card, evidently. And she made this call. So I went right over there. And the person was ready for me. And I looked at spaces, and guy signed, I think the next day I came back and signed the contract. So the business cards, I think, helped. Okay, that was just an aside, but business cards, it would be better to have them early if you can. Okay, so you go back to your couple of favorite vendor malls and you ask about available spaces. Likely you'll be talking to a clerk who might not have authority to discuss that. Or maybe you'll be talking to the owner or the store manager. If so, they'll probably show you things on the spot. If it's an employee, they'll probably give you a phone number to call to make an appointment. And then you'll go to your appointment, or you'll follow along with the store manager, and they'll show you what's available. And you'll have to kind of evaluate it. One thing that is interesting about a booth space is where it is in the mall. Is it near the front of the store, or in a part of the store that seems popular or well-traveled? Another thing would be the configuration of it. Is it skinny and long, deep? Which I think is a challenge. Broad and wide would be better, or square. Is it lighted? That was one of the things about the booth with the ceiling falling down. It was also dark. So, is there an overhead light? Is it decent light, or is it really harsh? If there isn't overhead light, is there at least an outlet? Outlets are good. Outlets sometimes put a few dollars on your rent tab because people want outlets to be able to sell lamps and things like that. So an outlet is very good to have, and it's also handy to plug your vacuum cleaner in when you want to clean your booth. So electric and lighting. Walls. Our first store it was just the perimeter of the store that had vendor booths available to rent, and most of the areas were just taped out areas on the floor. And we decided that we wanted to put up some walls. Some people have put up pegboards, but I personally dislike pegboards. I just never have liked them. So I asked Mark if he would make us some movable walls, and what we did was a framework, some black fencing from Farm and Fleet, and a couple of old curtains I had in the basement. So we made some wall panels, and so our first two little booths each had an armoire for one wall, and then one of these panels for another wall. It wasn't really an armoire, more of a hutch. Had a hutch. And then, of course, the cost of it. Is it the going rate? You've probably talked to other people. What's the rent per square foot and so forth, to find out if it's way high. And a lot of things can affect that. Our booth was a little bit more expensive, the first booth we rented at the current store, because it was right across from a booth that was a very popular destination booth. And it was also, it had a checkerboard floor, and the manager thought that this pallet wall with some galvanized stuff on the bottom made it more valuable. And it also had electric. So that stuff seemed worth the extra $5 or whatever to be able to get that space. So we went. And then the woman with the really popular booth moved out, but now it's the checkout. So that's potentially a really good location for us to be worked out. Sixth piece of advice: consider starting small, maybe really small, like a small booth, like our 4x6 one, or a wall. Some malls rent out Some malls rent out walls that are, you can put little shelves on and things like that, hang pictures, whatever. Or have a little bit out from the wall where you can put small furniture. Or even just a shelving unit. You can rent those at our store. So I'm advising that you consider starting small, but be flexible. And I say that because it could be the case that when you go into the store for your appointment and your tour, you will find that there is a larger space that's highly desirable that suddenly came available. And most leases, well, some leases are month to month, but for instance, in our store, it's 6 months at a time. And if you're small and you have to wait 6 months to change it, you're going to miss out on chances to get a little bit larger space. So it might be worth it to start with a desirable booth, even though it's more money than you might want to initially pay. Number 7, there's an application process. They have to like you and accept you, just like you have to like them and accept them. One store that we visited had an online application attached to which you had to submit pictures of your current booth, or at least pictures of things you had upcycled, the type of inventory that you intended to sell in their store. And I assume that it would have to be kind of vignetted and look really good, like a store display for this application. At the time I was looking at that store, which we didn't end up renting because when I took Mark there on a weekend, it was dead in there. No traffic. So he said, no, thank you. It was also kind of far from our house. I had started quickly making some things and decided I really didn't need to do that because I wasn't interested in them anymore. Nice store, but it just didn't seem to have the traffic that we wanted to have. The first store we were in had a pretty minimal process, very short contract. I didn't have to show pictures or anything, although by then I was prepared in case. I think the fact that the gal with the little shop where I had asked, do you know of anyone that's got booth space, had called and said, I think I have somebody for you. Let me take a picture of her business card. I think that business card really helped. So she had the impression as I was going in the door that I knew what I was doing, even though I didn't know what I was doing. So those business cards can really be your friend. The current store where we are, she just wanted to see a picture of our booth at the other store on my phone. And she looked at it, oh, you know what you're doing. So that was very quick. There is a contract and so forth. 8 is practical considerations. And I'll list the distance from your home because you'll need to get in there pretty frequently. Our current store is about 40 minutes from our house, which is a little farther than I would like to drive, but it's worth it. It's a good store. The other store was off in a totally different direction, a direction we rarely travel. It was closer, but less handy. So that distance is a consideration. And sometimes you'll get a call, you sold your desk or something like that. And it'd be like, oh, okay, we got to get over there with something to replace that big piece of furniture. Practical considerations also include things like, do I need a tax ID, a business tax ID? Now, I have to tell you, I had 16 of my years as a practicing psychologist. I was an independent contractor. We had kind of a clinic, but we were all our own individual businesses. And I ask my husband, having previously been an independent contractor and having an LLC, if I needed to do that again. Mark's a lawyer. He says, no, we'll just do it on your own personal Social Security number. And so that's the way we've been operating. If we ever made a profit at this business, I did with my psychology practice, but if we ever made a profit with the vintage business, then I would need to be paying in estimates, quarterly estimates, and keeping track, paying taxes. And we had no intention of doing vendor fairs where you would have to collect sales tax. We had no intention of selling items that we purchase wholesale. You have to have a tax ID, business tax ID, in order to order from a wholesaler. So that's one thing. Do you need a business tax ID? And then a logo. Do you need a logo? And how the heck do you get a logo? Well, we don't have a logo. I kind of would like to have a logo. It would be handy for YouTube if we had a logo. But we don't. We have our business cards, which just have, a design that we could agree on from Vistaprint when I ordered the cards. But a lot of the vendors have created a nice logo. Now, you probably want to have a sign in your booth with your business name on it. Business name is actually You Found Us, Upcycled Vintage. So I just have that on some signs in the booth and painted some stuff that looks kind of like our business cards for consistency's sake. We do use business cards as price tags on our furniture items. So that's another thing that kind of ties it in. But if you have a logo, you can have a stamp made and stamp the back of your business card if you want to. Create your price tags with that stamp. So it would be nice for signs and cards to have a logo. So that's enough for the preliminaries. Evaluating what you're doing and where you're going to do it. Very informative stuff to get nailed down before you get down to brass tacks. Now, on our next video, I'm going to talk about hitting the ground running. And hopefully, the other geezer will join me for